Good morning, everyone. My name is Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. Thank you all for being here with us this morning. In support of our collective work to build back a better Chicagoland for everyone, today's program brings together visionary leaders who are working to change business practices and pursue policy reforms to ensure that the region focuses on an equitable recovery for all of our city's residents. There's a significant coordinated effort to help achieve these goals, and it's part of the club's mission to ensure that our members and the business community at large is fully plugged in and aware of how to get involved. I want to take a moment to thank our presenting sponsor for today's program, BMO Harris Bank, and our silver sponsor, Mesero. Thank you for your support in bringing this conversation today. Before we get started, just a quick housekeeping note for anyone that's new to GoToWebinar. On the screen, you'll see a quick how-to for usage. If you just hover your mouse in the right-hand corner of your screen and click that small orange arrow, the GoToWebinar control panel will open, and then you can click on the various small arrows on the panel that will allow you to access handouts, including information on our program today, as well as the question button where you can submit questions for the panel. And I know we're going to try to get to as many as we can. If you have any technical issues at all during the day, just email programs@executivesclub.org and a member of our team will be in touch. And now to introduce our panelists and our moderator is Eric Smith, Vice Chair, BMO Harris Bank. Eric, over to you.
Thanks, Margaret, and good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thanks to the Executives Club for hosting this fantastic event. When I heard about the theme for today's discussion, Together We Rise, clearly BMO was proud to serve as one of the presenting sponsors. This is a very important topic and dialogue for us to have as we chart our course through an unprecedented time in our history, a nation that has grappled with the coronavirus, an economic downturn, and racial and social unrest. And we will need more than ever the public and private sector to come together to focus on bold, transformative solutions for how we build back stronger and how we focus on inclusive economic recovery. So I'm really pleased to introduce the moderator for the panel today, Dr. Helene Gayle, who is the CEO of the Chicago Community Trust, the nation's third largest endowment fund here in the country that has over $3 billion in assets and funds under management. Dr. Gayle has been a stalwart leader here in our Chicago community and really bringing together the public and private sector. When BMO looked to make our own $5 billion commitment earlier this year, she was one of the first people that we turned to focus on how we could make sure that we are helping to promote inclusive economic recovery. So I'm looking forward to our discussion today, and again would like to thank our very esteemed panelists for joining us. And so now over to my friend, Dr. Helene Gayle.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you, Margaret, and the Executives Club for having this forum. Really excited to dive right in and have the opportunity to hear from our panelists today. And I'm going to just start out with a few comments. I'm going to introduce the panel, but I'm also going to let them give a few-minute introduction of themselves, because I think it's useful to hear kind of the perspective that each of them is bringing to this. So let me just start by saying, this panel came together because of the imperative around looking at the issues of equitable recovery. About a year ago, the Chicago Community Trust rolled out our new strategy focused on closing the racial and ethnic wealth gap, because we believe that we can't move forward as a region unless by leaving 2/3 of its population behind, and that the wealth divide that exists here in our region is one of the things that is holding us back as a region, as well as holding back the potential of so many of its citizens. Clearly, when COVID hit and we saw the disproportionate impact on communities of color, it only highlighted the importance of a focus on the wealth gap and communities and families who have been left behind for far too long. We know that if we look at the recent past and the Great Recession of 2006 and 2008, Black and Latinx communities never really fully recovered, whether it's looking at the high unemployment rates, the housing prices and foreclosure, we can look across this region and recognize that as the region recovered, Black and Latinx communities were often left out. We know that median incomes in the region decreased for everybody, but decreased the most for Black and Latinx households, where median income in the region for Black household decreased by 9% between 2010 and 2017, Latinx 4%, and white population 5%. We also know that neighborhoods that had high concentration of poverty had smaller increases in household median income, were the ones that were more likely to continue to experience unemployment, et cetera. And so we've committed to doing all that we can to make sure that that does not happen, and that as we think about recovering as a city and as a region, we focus on the issues of equity. And that's why we, along with many partners here, started the Together We Rise initiative, and we'll talk about that in more detail. I'm thrilled to have with me today the panelists that you'll hear from: Gloria Castillo, who was recently brought on as the director of Together We Rise, David Doig, who is the president of Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, Marty Nesbitt, the co-CEO of the Vistria Group, and Vela-Wagner, the executive director of the Mars Wrigley Foundation. So as I mentioned, I'm going to ask each of them to say a word about themselves and the perspective they bring, and then we'll get into our question and answer. And Gloria, maybe I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you, Helene. And I want to thank the Executives Club for hosting this conversation. It's really important. And I'm glad for the opportunity to introduce myself and the initiative Together We Rise for an Equitable and Just Recovery. So what you should know about me is I'm a native Chicagoan. I have a really deep love for this city, and it's afforded me tremendous opportunities. Afforded opportunities for education, for a career, and as a business owner, as a certified minority business enterprise. I've had the chance to go through tremendous programs in Chicago, like Leadership Greater Chicago, and that prepared me to serve as a board member on City Colleges of Chicago, Field Foundation, and the Chicago Community Trust. I'm very proud of that. Well, the through line for all of this is, in every role that I've played, the inequities of this city, the historical and current racial inequities, kind of that's built into the structure of the city, have always played a role in how we did our work, where we distribute our resources. And so for me, it was this kind of negative impact of structural racism that made me constantly think about, why don't we have a coordinated vision? Why don't we have a coordinated effort to address this? And so when Together We Rise was launched, it was the first time that I had seen a real common vision to address these racial inequities. And what we know now, with kind of the triple threat of the health crisis, the economic crisis, the social crisis, we now see kind of in deep relief that the disinvestment on the south and west sides in our south suburbs has never been more acute. And people are really suffering. And now we have a once in a generation, kind of opportunity to come back and address this challenge and really create a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive economy. And what came to me with Together We Rise is a strong regional economy really can and should benefit all of us. And so with this initiative, and I'll look forward to talking more about it, but I think everyone should know that they can join in on a partnership that includes philanthropy, government, business, nonprofits, and community to really drive an inclusive economic growth. And so it's an exciting time for us. It's a difficult time, but it's a time kind of brought together with great opportunity.
Great. And if everybody just take 2 brief minutes and just give a bit of your background so people understand the perspective that you're coming from, your role, your organization, and we'll dive into more of it. And,
Yeah.
and we're just doing brief intros. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. Thanks, Helene, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Again, this is an important conversation, and like Gloria, I am born and raised in Chicago, so proud to be part of this. I currently lead the Mars Wrigley Foundation, which supports communities around the world where Mars Wrigley has a significant business presence. And nowhere is that presence as deep as it is here in Chicago, where our founders first started. We became involved with Together We Rise because it truly aligns with the foundation's mission of creating better communities, and it aligns with our business purpose, which centers around creating connection and building a more caring world. And it is that interconnected framework of Together We Rise that's so critical. So what Gloria was just speaking to about having everyone at the table, philanthropy, business, government, our community-based organizations, that's where we found great value of having that cross-sector collaboration and the expertise to be a part of a much larger initiative to heal, to begin planning and building back better for all. We know that where we are now is not where we want to be. We need to take action, and we know businesses are doing great work in the communities already. We will continue to support our local partners, but we made a $1 million commitment to Together We Rise because we know we have to go above and beyond. We all need to step up during this time if we truly want change to happen. So again, I look forward to working with everyone, talking and sharing, learning as part of this conversation today to be that first step as we move forward for our region and to ensure that everyone will benefit as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. David, just a bit about yourself and your organization. We'll get into the discussion later. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Gayle. So I'm David Doig. I'm the president of Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives. Actually, I'm a native Chicagoan. My kids would criticize me for saying that. I actually grew up in the western suburbs, but moved to Chicago as a 20-year-old. I started my career actually working on the west side in the North Lawndale community, doing community organizing and community development. Then spent about 10 years working for the city of Chicago. I was the deputy commissioner of housing and the first deputy in the planning department, and then was the superintendent of the park district for about 5 years. And actually met Gloria and Marty. As Gloria mentioned, we were all in Leadership Greater Chicago in 1994. I know that sounds like ancient history, but we share that. And so having been at the Park District, I then joined what was then known as Park Bank Initiatives. We were part of a local bank, Park National Bank. And then in 2008, we were acquired by US Bank. And so we spun off from US Bank in 2010, started Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives. And so we've been operating as a community development corporation, focused mostly on the far south side of Chicago, and in particular in the Pullman neighborhood. And so I'll talk a little bit more about our work, but I'm excited to be on this panel and join my friends in talking about how we focus on a truly equitable recovery for Chicago.
Great. Marty.
Yes, Marty Nesbitt, co-CEO of the Vistria Group, which is a private equity group. I spent most of my career sort of hovering between sort of policy and being an entrepreneur, and recognized over time that there's a value proposition that hadn't been priced in the marketplace for businesses that not only create value for customers, employees and investors, but also a broader social value that makes an impact on the community around them. So this is a perfect topic for me to engage in. We're really passionate about this at Vistria, and so I look forward to sharing deeper perspectives on this as we get into the dialogue.
Great, thanks. And I think all of you touched on a lot of the topics that we're going to continue to probe on, particularly how we work across the different sectors and really work in a way that hopefully is a bit different and really learns how we can integrate and really complement the work of each other. So thanks for those introductory comments. Maybe David, let me turn to you, because you are doing a lot of the kind of work that we think about that very well could be part of the Together We Rise portfolio. And as you have worked in Pullman and now in Roseland, you know, I think there's a lot that we can learn from some of your comprehensive work. So would you just say a little bit more about the model, the structure, and why you think, and what are some of the elements that you think have been important for the success, if you will, or the impact that has occurred so far?
Yeah, thanks. So I think where we typically kind of start to think about community development is really this focus on place. So we are very much kind of a place-based developer. We look at neighborhoods. We believe that all neighborhoods have assets. They wouldn't have become neighborhoods if they didn't have assets. And assets are different within each neighborhood. Some benefit from transportation, others benefit from institutional presence, others have historic resources, but we believe that every neighborhood has assets. And so what we really try to do is we try to build off of those assets and focus then on how do we use the assets to create more community wealth? How do we use it to bring jobs, bring economic opportunity, bring housing to the neighborhoods? And so in our case, that started when we bought 200 acres of former industrial land owned by, at that time was owned by Ryerson Steel. And we started down a course to really deliver then economic benefit for the neighborhoods. And so we have a very unique partnership with U.S. Bank. U.S. Bank has been both our financial partner, both from a debt and equity standpoint, and has made significant commitments to working with us to execute on these plans. And so in terms of the lessons that we've learned, and as you mentioned, we're now starting to get into Roseland, which is the community just to the west of us. I think when we look at redevelopment, you've got to think comprehensively. So it's not just a affordable housing strategy. It's not just a job creation strategy. And so we've got to look comprehensively at all the issues that are facing communities. I think it's got to be long-term. I often say, you know, our communities didn't get this way in 15, 20, you know, it's taken decades of disinvestment to leave us where we're at. So the thought that somehow communities are going to be redeveloped in 5 years or 10 years is just not realistic. They've got to have a 40-year kind of reinvestment trajectory. And so we look at deep kind of investments. So these are significant. In our case, we've coordinated over $400 million of new investment, and we still have more to do. And so you've got to look at this kind of over the long term and make sure it's deep and comprehensive. But I think with that, I think we're starting to now see some of the impact of that kind of comprehensive, deep and long-term investment.
You know, one of the things, and we'll probably get into it a little bit more, that we really want to make sure that the Together We Rise initiative includes is the voice of community. Because I think far too long, these efforts have not had community voice at the center. I know it's something you feel strongly about. Could you talk a bit about how you've incorporated the community and, you know, maybe even an example of how you did something different as a result of that?
Yeah. So when we started on our work in Pullman about 10 years ago, the first thing we did was we took an entire year and basically surveyed the community. So we went to every community group and church organization and civic organization and basically listened. We had bought this property, we knew we were going to redevelop it, but we didn't come in with a lot of like specific plans. And so this is back in 2009, kind of in the height of the last recession. And there were four kind of consistent themes that the community told us. The first was the need for access to healthy food. So we were the city's largest food desert. People on the far south side were having to travel to Hyde Park or to the south suburbs to get basic groceries. The second was the need for jobs. Our area had suffered from huge disinvestment in the 60s and the 70s when the steel industry left. And so we were confronted with high joblessness that was also then being compounded by the recession. The third was the need for affordable, safe indoor recreation space. So the community had wonderful athletic programs that operated at local parks, but what do you do on a day like today when it's 30 degrees, and where do you go for a birthday party? Where do you go for indoor recreation? And then the fourth was really around affordable housing, and particularly for seniors in the neighborhood or other groups that wanted to stay in the community but were worried about affordability and how do they maintain their house. So with those kind of four principles, we started. The first was we were the group that brought Walmart back to Chicago, which is a bit ironic when you think about bringing Walmart to Pullman. But we were fortunate that they were at a point where they were looking to make investments in urban areas and used Chicago as kind of a test case. And then we followed that up with more retail. And now have really focused our efforts on bringing higher quality, higher paying jobs, particularly industrial, transportation, distribution, and logistics jobs. But it starts with listening to the community. So we're actually going through a similar exercise right now in Roseland. We're actually engaged in a quality of life planning exercise that LISC is sponsoring. And so we're going through that same exercise to learn what the residents of Roseland want to see, what kind of aspirations they have, and what plans we should be working on.
Great, thanks. And I know there'll be many more things to come back to, but let me just turn to both Ann and Marty. David, you're a business, but your business is community development. Both of you have other day jobs that aren't necessarily all about community, but you have decided to really engage in that way. So maybe I'll start with you, Ann, and just say a bit about why, and you started in your introduction, but why Mars Wrigley is invested in this, and how do you think about ways in which you can both do good as a business, but also do good in a social way, do well by doing good, as people say?
Sure. Thank you. When we became involved again, it was really about that collaborative framework and having everyone at the table, most importantly, having community-based organizations, to your point, because that is critical. They have been at the forefront of this pandemic. They have been on the ground and understand what the community needs, and that true informative, collaborative process and the structure that you have built through Together We Rise is that opportunity for everyone. We all, again, have our focus areas. We all are doing great work and have local partnerships established, but this true collaboration is something that is unique for our region, to be able to build this together as we heal and move forward. I think is really the compelling thing that drew us to Together We Rise. And for those that already engaged, I think it's a great opportunity to learn and grow. And for those that may not have been as involved in the past, it's a great point of entry. It's an opportunity, today is that first step, asking the questions, hearing from the experts here today, but then taking that next step and really bringing all of your assets to the table. And when you talk about, doing well by doing good, yes, it's in investing in your business. Every business needs to be profitable, but it's investing in your people. It's investing in all of your stakeholders, your supply chain, and your community. We're all impacted by the health of our community. And if you don't get involved, you can't have a healthy community.
So true. Marty, you're as you said in your intro, good example of somebody who's kind of straddled policy as well as business and really have a commitment to the community. One of the things that has been very heartening, I think, during this time, you've actually taken upon yourself to kind of hit the pavement, if you will, and to encourage other businesses to not be faint of heart and give up on this city. Why are you so encouraged, or what gives you hope about the way the business community can really make a difference, particularly in this moment when we're coming out of this really difficult economic moment, as well as some of the social unrest that we saw that also had impact on the business sector?
Yeah, well, I think it's just a recognition that there's a natural dynamic that we can tap into with respect to the nature of capitalists, if you don't mind me referring to us as that. But, democracy, to me, in my mind, when I think about this from a big picture, democracy and capitalism create the sort of greatest socioeconomic construct in the history of the world, right? They make us safer, give us a better standard of living, provide the platform for which we all create quality of life. But they're not perfect. And they're under duress everywhere. Chicago's not unique. We see capitalism and democracy under duress all over the world. But they're also not science, right? We made it up. We made up this concept of democracy. We made up this concept of capitalism, and so we can change it. And the fact of the matter is, I'm confident that capitalists, like I have, recognize that a strong and stable society is the golden goose. It's the goose that lays the golden egg. It's the platform that gives all of us in the city of Chicago and beyond an opportunity for a higher standard of living, a better quality of life. What we recognize is that as participants in the system, we have to invest. We have to nurture the golden goose. We have to feed it. We have to educate it. We have to give it clean air and clean water so that it can thrive. And when we recognize that that just expands the opportunity for all of us, I think all participants in sort of the capitalist construct will continue to invest more and more. So it means it's in all of our interests to have better housing, to have better schools, to have better outcomes for people who live in these communities. It's low-hanging fruit. Imagine how powerful and thriving the Chicago region would be if our communities on the south and west side were as strong and stable as our communities on the North Shore. It's just so easy. And I recognize that talent and innovation and creativity is equally distributed. And so there must be just opportunities for us as business people to create value and wealth by tapping into these resources. And so I'm just optimistic that at this moment of stress, business people recognize the opportunity and the obligation associated with investing in these communities and create better outcomes, because it's good for everybody. And so we've charged as part of our business. I mean, and that's how we make our money. We believe companies that do that are worth more. They will be worth more over the long time. They will be supported by the communities. They'll be supported by policy. Their revenues and income will be more stable. They should trade at higher multiples. And so it's one of these things of sort of jujitsu on capitalism. Like when you realize you make money by making the world a better place, guess what? You'll make the world a better place. And so we're playing in that space. We think it's a real value proposition. But we also say to our CEOs of our portfolio companies, hey, take this moment to go to your HR department and say, we are not moving forward with any search unless people from these communities are included as potential candidates, and people from these communities are included as interviewers trying to attract these candidates. We're going to our capital planning departments and saying, look at every dollar of capital we spend and say, can we do this in a more creative way that includes resources from these communities to help these communities grow? And then we're engaging with our policymakers in the cities where we have headquarters and saying, here's a check. We're investing in your efforts to close these equity gaps. And if you don't make progress on this, we're going to think twice about where we locate our headquarters, because we want to be placed in places that share our values around this issue. And if we all as businesses behave that way, guess what? These communities will get better. It will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And as David said, it won't happen overnight, but people will make money and prosper along the way, and it will be a self-fulfilling, reinforcing process. So that's why I'm super enthusiastic about it. I know this will work, because as soon as you tell business people they can make money by making the world a better place, they will make the world a better place.
So true. Just follow on that. Are you feeling, would you say that in the last 5 years, there has been a clear trend in that direction? Or is it still an uphill battle to convince businesses that they can do well by doing good?
Well, it's interesting, like 8 years ago or so, when my partner Kip Kirkpatrick and I sort of developed this thesis around investing, there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm around it, although investors thought it was unique. But we said when we developed the plan, like, if we don't do this, it will be pitchforks and torches, right? The current path is unsustainable. And in the last 12 months, it's pitchforks and torches, right? All over the country. But I can tell you the momentum around this is accelerating at an accelerating rate. Our first fund, we raised $400 million doing this. Our second fund, we raised $875. Our third fund, we raised over $1 billion. And our fourth fund will be even larger than that. And a lot of big players are recognizing the opportunity associated with this, and there's more and more capital being raised around this. And I think other businesses, publicly traded companies, are saying, wait a minute, maybe it's not just about shareholder value. Maybe there's some other obligation that we have as participants in the system to the broader community, and not just our shareholders, because these things are inextricably linked. You can't create a valuable company if you're trying to operate in a dysfunctional community. You have to have a strong and thriving community. So I think it is accelerating rapidly.
Yeah, I think it's one of the more hopeful trends, the fact that the lines are being blurred, where one used to think if you wanted to do good, you ended up in the social sector. And if you just wanted to make money, you go into business. And I think those lines are being blurred in a way that I think will be important. And as you said, we created these systems, we can recreate them. So it's great, and I think a real encouraging message. Gloria, let me just turn to you. You recently joined Together We Rise as the director, and you were really not, you had stepped down from one role, and you weren't really thinking about necessarily going back to full-time work. Say a bit about why you decided to do this, and maybe, just in brief, give people a little bit of an idea of what Together Now as an initiative is. We've talked around it, but now maybe just give a bit of an outline of what it actually is and why it is that you were so enthusiastic that we could pull you in out of retirement, if you will, to come back and do this.
Well, thanks for that. It was, so for me, having spent 16 years at Chicago United, advancing multiracial leadership in business, looking at how we can increase representation on corporate boards of directors, how we advance the talent pipeline in ways that people can have really great jobs and maximize their own personal potential, and then looking at how do we scale minority businesses so that they're doing business with corporations in a strategic manner, and being people, companies that create jobs. That's what I spent the last 16 years doing, and I was really committed to making sure that we really provided opportunity. And I saw continuing value in that. What made me excited about Together We Rise was the fact that over all of these years, I have not seen something that really brought everybody together, kind of with the intersectionality that Marty just described. That is really the secret sauce. He described that cross section of how you look at capital and how you look at the corporate structures and creating policies that create jobs and creating opportunities. So Together We Rise for me was the big bet that we really need to take in Chicago. So coming out of retirement to participate in the big bet was just too exciting not to do. And so when you look at Together We Rise, this idea of transforming practices across multi-sectors is, for me, something that we just can't look away from. We can see how if we pool resources in philanthropy and make strategic investments, that is going to have a transformative effect on the Black and Latinx communities. If we then build in re-envisioning and reforming business practices, as Marty said, making sure that you have diverse slates, making sure that you are hiring from the communities that you're investing in, and that becomes transformative. And then you have the policy changes, some of them that David talked about, that actually support investment in a more equitable society, create kind of a catalytic approach to those neighborhoods that have been disinvested for decades. That is what Together We Rise is doing in a very strategic manner, so in a very comprehensive manner. And it's, we've already brought together partners from the foundation community, from the business community, from nonprofits, and we're engaging residents much in the way that David talked about, really engaging and making them the center of Together We Rise, listening to what their vision is for their neighborhoods, how they want to lead, how they want to live, how they see a healthy, safe community. It's more important that we know what they see as a healthy, safe community than we bring that in from a top-down perspective. So if I look at Together We Rise, the three things that we need to focus on are increasing employment opportunities, strengthening small business, and catalyzing development in underinvested neighborhoods. If we stay laser focused on those three efforts with this multi-sector approach, this is an innovation, this is transformative, and that's what I found so exciting.
Yeah, and just to amplify that, when we first started talking about Together We Rise, it was primarily the funding part of it, and that's one aspect. So, there's a fund that will be created. We've started raising dollars. We have almost $40 million that we've raised thus far, and we think we have the potential to raise a lot more that will help to fund specific activities. There's the business component, which is really a lot of what we've been talking about now. How do businesses use their influence, their practices, et cetera, in ways that can really help to meet some of the goals in the communities that we most want to focus on, making sure there's an equitable recovery. And then there are policies. What are the policies that could support this notion of an equitable recovery? So really a three-pronged approach, bringing the different sectors together. I'm going to turn back to you, Anne, to talk a bit about that second prong, the businesses. We have a very collaborative ecosystem here in Chicago, and there's a lot of work going on. But I think part of what we hoped, and you mentioned it, Gloria, is that this could be done in a more collaborative way. You're involved in corporate coalition and other business coalitions. What do you think businesses need to do, not just as singly as an individual business, but what are the things that would help businesses collaborate more? What are the incentives for people saying, I might join in with others to be able to create something that's bigger than what I could do by myself?
Sure, no, exactly. And the corporate coalition is a perfect example of that. And its focus completely overlaps with Together We Rise, in that it was formed to address the severe economic inequities in the Chicago region. And we come together to look at how do we leverage our assets and where we each are on our journeys to share, to learn from one another. Some are further along, recognizing that there are those that we can take that expertise that they bring and that experience and come together to then look at how that impacts our business needs. One great example of that work is the Chicago Resiliency Network. There were a number of companies that were already doing a great job hiring from communities on the south and west side, but they recognized that they wanted to build a more healing-centered workplace. And what does that look like, and what type of expertise is needed? And instead of everyone doing their own thing and trying to develop their own programs, through the coalition, we're able to share best practice and really develop a program that would meet everyone's needs. And so that first cohort is in action, and the second cohort is under development. So that's a great example of taking that work and the path that everyone was on to come together and collectively recognize what more could be done. In that same vein, there's also work looking at supply chain and how are you sourcing your local spend through vendors on the south and west side. Looking at suppliers, vendors, how do you get small businesses involved? Again, sharing those best practices, and so that we're all not trying to go on our each individual paths, but recognizing that we can come together, and in that it can be quite powerful.
We're starting to get some questions in. Let me filter one in, and maybe David, you could start with this. The question specifically asks about schools and the importance of schools in an economic recovery and progress to closing equity gaps. And recognizing that, during this pandemic, we've all been concerned about the digital divide, who is getting access to high quality training, et cetera, and worrying about whether or not these gaps will continue. I direct it to you, David, because I think, in the work that you've done in the neighborhoods that you've worked in, while you're focusing on economic development, I think you've been able to see the benefits beyond just the economic sector. So maybe say a little bit about some of the offshoots of the work and the positive benefits to the neighborhood beyond just the economic development work.
Yeah, so I think we approach this, particularly the school question, similar to other neighborhood assets, and understand that high quality schools are fundamental and foundational to rebuilding neighborhoods. We're fortunate on the far south side to have great schools. We have Gwendolyn Brooks, which is one of the top selective enrollment schools in the city. We have Poe Elementary, which is one of the top 3 or 4 classical elementary schools. We've got Pullman Elementary, which is also a class 1 elementary school. And so when we're talking about recruiting companies or working with employees, we focus on those schools, not only as feeders, but also as attractions. Part of what we do is also affordable housing. And one of the first questions anyone wants to know is, okay, if I move here, where am I going to send my kids to school? And so having high quality schools is foundational. And also having higher education institutions. We have Olive Harvey, which has the city's only TDL training program. And so building off the assets of the region around transportation logistics, we want to support Olive Harvey and make sure that they're providing the pipeline of workers that can support that industry. And also Chicago State, which is another key kind of anchor institution within the community. So schools are very much part of that equation, and we've got to support them, we've got to build them up, and we've got to continue to find ways to engage them to support community development.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything else to add to that around education? Let me couple other questions that have come in and focus on the role of government and policy. And maybe Marty, I'll ask you, because you talked a bit about how you've straddled policy, and just to say a bit about what you think the role of the public sector is in an initiative like this, and broadly speaking, how the public sector and policy change can be real partners as we think about, how do we invest in these in communities of color particularly. I don't know if are you muted? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm muted. There was some feedback. Sorry. Anyway, I think, primarily recognizing that the business community is not the enemy, but the business community is a potential partner. And I think coming to grips with the fact that taxpayer dollars just can't solve all these problems. And you have to figure out how to leverage the dynamics of capitalism and investment and profit seeking to make meaningful progress in solving these problems. So I think thinking about policy in a way that partners with business, that creates incentives, pathways, opportunities for businesses to make a profit, pay their employees by engaging in activity to make these communities better. So for example, one of our early investments was an online high school completion business, right? It was low cost high school education, not GED, made available for adults who, for whatever reason, life comes at you, didn't finish high school. They find themselves in a job where they're good and they're eligible for a promotion to supervisor, and they can't get it because they don't have a high school diploma. Well, we developed the largest high school in the United States of America, 60,000 students, who it was discovered had a higher propensity to finish college once they finished that high school program because of the self-motivation, the self-initiative that it takes to do something like that online. It created an incredible population of highly engaged, highly motivated students. We made our money by making them successful. And it turned out to be a great business. We then ended up partnering with big businesses who had large populations of undereducated employees, but needed them as a resource to populate middle management. And so they came back and said, well, look, if our employees will finish your program, we'll reimburse them for their high school completion. And it's just a win-win. It saves social costs, it creates opportunity for the students, and also creates a pool of promotable employees for the businesses. And so I think policymakers recognizing that dynamic and making it easier for businesses to engage in a productive way, but also recognizing that you have to monitor and regulate capitalists because they can get out of control. And so regulating those partners in a productive way can really make a huge difference. And that's why I love this Together We Rise, because it from the top, right, with the title of the initiative, recognizes that this is a partnership, that we have to do it together. We can't treat business as the bad guy, and business can't treat policymakers as the bad guy, right? We together have very positive attributes, and when you leverage the best of the attributes of each of those institutions, you can create a very powerful, transformative dynamic in these communities.
Yeah, can I respond?
Yeah,
Quickly?
Go ahead, David. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think really I see the government role as priming the pump when it comes to development. Often government's got to be the first one in to make these investments. In our case, we used about $50 million of TIP to do a lot of the site and infrastructure work and a lot of the environmental cleanup. And there were a few early projects like the Nesbitt soap factory and the Whole Foods distribution center that we used TIF on. But what's been interesting is in the last two developments, which were a new warehouse for SC Johnson, and then most recently the Amazon distribution center, we didn't use a single nickel of government support. There wasn't any tax incentives. And so the private sector really, to Marty's point, has kind of seen the value proposition and has taken over. And we haven't needed to use government funds to do that. But government was important in getting it going.
Gloria.
And then if you take it to the next step, So now you have people who have finished their high school education, you've employed them at the new Amazon Center. Now you have actually the opportunity to strengthen your tax base, to increase home ownership. If you increase home ownership, you reduce the out-migration that we have been experiencing. And now you start to see all of these building blocks to really creating a stronger region. So you can't simply have businesses without cooperation of policy. You can't have policy without creating opportunity. And once you create those opportunities, now we start to build the building blocks to close the racial wealth gap, because you have home ownership, you have savings, you have all of the things that we all need in order to have a sustainable, kind of resilient life, and one that supports families and neighborhoods. So I think those pieces fit so well together, and it really describes why we want to have this intersectionality, this multi-sector approach. That's what really strengthens the entire region.
Great, thanks. I have a question that I'll ask all of you, and looks like our time is starting to wind down. So all of you are leaders in your respective areas. Can you share some practical ideas on how we can better coordinate the planning and execution of inclusive investment strategies to maximize on the potential collaboration among the private, philanthropic, government stakeholders and the resources these groups can provide? So I think just, we've talked about it in somewhat conceptual terms. What are some of the practical ways in your experience that you've seen the breaking down those silos and really working in a way that builds that kind of collaboration? And some of you have given some examples, but just give you a chance to think about others. And I'll start with you, Anne.
Again, I think it's identifying these points of entry. We are not experts across all of these sectors. And so whether it's through Together We Rise or the Corporate Coalition, again, we've seen the opportunity there to bring together resources, to bring together expertise. In investments, there are shovel-ready projects that are available, and they just need that next step to take them off the ground, to provide the financing or some of that pre-development financing to get those programs going. And so by everyone coming together, looking at what are some of those projects and where we can align our resources, bringing in the talent, and yes, the financial resources, but it's often talent and expertise that can take things to the next level.
And maybe I'll ask it a slightly different way. What do you think are some of the disincentives, and where have you seen obstacles as we think about what are the ways in which we need to incentivize this kind of collaboration? What do you see as the biggest obstacles that you've come across where people aren't willing to do some of the things that, Anne, you so nicely pointed out? So, David, you look like you got obstacles.
Yeah. No, we've had a few obstacles. So I think for us, the organizing principle is really place, right? So when we think about kind of neighborhood redevelopment, we start with location, we start with geography, and in many ways we view our role as kind of a community quarterback. And so what that means is we are constantly solving problems, constantly solving some of these silo issues, some of these territorial issues, and so. Dealing with government, you've got multi-siloed organizations, but our job is to kind of break down those and really hold government accountable for making sure that there is coordination at the grassroots level, or business, or the civic organization. So for us, it's the place is the organizing principle, and then how do we bring resources around that place and break down those barriers?
Gloria.
Yeah, I think one of the obstacles is there very often have been approaches that have felt very paternalistic to me, very top down, and really didn't engage the community in a co-design approach where they are really part of it. And so I think, for me, I think about the fact that we now have 5 working groups where we're going to look to at how do we approach household stability? How do we approach the neighborhood investment? How do we approach jobs and skills? And making sure that as we engage community, they're not talking about these individual silos, but how these silos connect and how will we fund the connections? Where are the gaps? How do we fund to the gaps? And so it sounds theoretical, but it's actually very tactical. It's very hands-on. It's very, very much part of that community voice that will make the difference in our being able to understand where the gaps are that prevent success, that create the obstacles, and then break down those obstacles.
Marty, here's a very specific question that came in for you that is along this line. So let me have you answer this one more specifically. It says, is there an effort underway to build a coalition among private equity firms, large and small, to embrace the notion of leveraging capitalism for the benefit of the broader society, as you mentioned? Or is this a one-off effort that you talked about in terms of what Vistria is doing? Is there some broader effort among private equity firms?
Yeah, I think it's an accelerating trend. I mean, these firms see the opportunity. We've had success doing this. There's a big, much bigger private equity firms. TPG, for example, has an effort around this initiative. KKR has an effort around this initiative. Blackstone has an effort around this initiative. Apollo has an effort now around this initiative. So, it's kind of co-opetition, right? We look at some opportunities together, but folks are off doing this themselves too. So a very much accelerating dynamic in this space. To the point about obstacles, though, I will say, to just be a little provocative, this does in some ways come back to this issue of race and fear associated with that, like the risk, the risk is too great, or the resources aren't there. And I think as a community, business community and policymakers, we got to get over that. And that where there's risk, there's opportunity. And I think many times the perception of risk is much higher than the real risk. And that there's low-hanging fruit, ways to make these communities stronger and better, that we just have to embrace that opportunity and go for it. And I say, when you talk about the policymakers and the business people, and I also think the allocators of capital. So you talked about investment and philanthropy. Let's not mismeasure this risk. There's tremendous opportunity here to make our region much better, and a rising tide rises all ships. So I think getting over that fear and that misperception of risk is important for all of us.
Great, and I'm getting the hook. It's about time. These things always speed by. There's really so much to talk about, and I hope this is just kind of a beginning and an opportunity for the audience to hear about Together We Rise, to get some perspective on the ways that we're thinking about this and how the different sectors are coming together. I'm glad you mentioned in your last comments, Marty, the issue of race and risk. I think as we think about what we're trying to accomplish, it's not a question of, is this good for the region? I think it's a question that if we don't do this for the region, we face a very uncertain and probably downward trending region for all of us. And I think that if we look at whether or not it's a risk to invest in communities where there's been disinvestment, where there hasn't been the opportunity for people to realize their potential, I think we have to ask, what is the counter risk of not doing that? And I think we all recognize that it's kind of in the name of Together We Rise, that we really do believe that if we're going to move forward as a city and as a region, we have to do that together. We have to do that in a way that brings all communities together. We have to do that in a way that makes it possible for all individuals to realize their full potential. And then I think we have the brightest possible future there is on the horizon if we do that. So I just want to thank all of you for participating today. I want to thank the people who were in the audience. And again, thanks to the Executive Club and to BMO Harris for their partnership in this. I want this to be something, I think we all want this to be something that in 3 to 5 years, we all look back and recognize that we started something that sets us on a path towards greater success for everyone. So thank you all for your time and your participation today.
Thank you.